All right, let's talk about test planning. So as a QA engineer, right, they'll be responsible for designing test plans, right, for every single feature. Right? So for every single feature that is documented as user stories, as or from the use case analysis early on, from there on, right, their responsibility is to convert those use cases into a test plan, right? Just like a developer's responsibility is to take that user story, to those use cases, right, and to convert it into some working piece of code, right? Their responsibility is to similarly implement it into some set of tests that are going to test whatever is being implemented. Right? So they'll at some point they'll need to document their strategies on how is it that they plan on implementing all these tests, right? Usually they'll write a test strategy document that will be a living document that changes over time, but starts off with introducing what are the different strategies that they're going to be using, what level of quality that they're looking for, what are the different environments that they're going to be testing, what types of tests they're going to be using, whether there's going to be manual, whether there's going to be automated tests, whether they're going to be doing some integration tests, what are all the machines that they're going to be focusing on, what are the repositories that they are going to be focusing on. So all these types of information is captured in a document that captures all this information and is then disseminated and shared with the rest of the team. Right? Usually there's some high-level introduction on the some verbiage there with the quality factors that they're going to be measuring, the level of quality, what type of testing is going to be done, and how is it going to be carried out, who's responsible for what, which focus is embedded in what team, all the references of the various repositories, the particular technology stack, whether they're using non-relational databases or relational databases, whether they're using Java, whether they're using Jenkins, whether they're using Jira, and all the different tools that they're going to be used for managing the bugs and the defects. Also, the deliverables, they'll be responsible for every single feature. Right, they'll be responsible for providing a test plan, right? Saying, for this particular feature, based on these user stories, and then based on these use case analysis, these are all the different tests that we're going to be running. Clicking here, and this is all the expected behavior. These are all the happy paths. These are all the different sad paths. These are all the edge cases for all the different features. These are all the different browsers that we're going to be using. These are different operating systems that we're going to be using. These are the versions of the vendors that we're going to be using. This is the list of all the tests that we're going to be doing, of which a subset is going to be manual testing, another subset is going to be automated testing, another subset is going to be some integration testings, right? So all this will be a deliverables from in this document. What are the different test plans? Also, any suggestions, a document suggesting, any usability factors that they might have identified, that even though it might be implemented correctly and it's behaving just like the specification says, they might have suggestions saying, yes, it works as designed, but it would be better if X, Y, and Z. Right? It's when I was actually using it, I found it confusing. And maybe a tooltip would have helped, or maybe some help would have identified, or maybe just a verbiage. It would have been better if you explained to me exactly. I would have not run into this issue. So they'll have a lot of suggestions at the end on how to improve the quality of the application. Again, the tools that they're going to be using for different things. For instance, they might need to have access to certain virtual machines that replicate the production environment as close as possible, right? With the data that is representative with a production environment. Also, signed off with a sign off from the development team on any gaps of testing gaps that they might have that they might identify with feedback with the development team, and then finally the scope, right? What the different test types, whether there's integration, manual, or automated, and any coverage or unit tests that they'll be executing. So as I said earlier, for each one of the features, right, the QA engineer will be responsible for providing what is referred to as a test plan. Right, a test plan is just going to be a collection of the various scenarios that the QA engineer is going to exercise. Right, when I click this button, this is what I expect. Right, if I type this into this input field, this is what I expect. And there'll be a long list of all these scenarios, right, which will be the test plan. Some of these scenarios will cover all the happy path, based on all the ideal in an ideal scenario, what I should expect to happen, and then the edge cases or the bad things that might happen where I deliberately input edge cases or bad data to see that it behaves and that it's resilient and it doesn't crash. Typically, these test plans are discussed with the rest of the team, usually once a week or once at the beginning of the sprint planning. And the QA engineer says, this is the test plans that, based on the stories that we moved into the sprint, right? This is the tests that I'd be running. And so we need to meet at some point and agree that these are indeed the tests that successfully validate the quality of the code that you're going to be building. We agree, we sign off, the developer has some input. Perhaps the developer might point out that there's actually some gaps. There's certain certain edge cases that the QA engineer might have not considered. Some of this information might be from the developer's knowledge of the implementation, right? That they know they have these if statements, these switch cases, these loops, that inform the testing. So the developer might point this out to the to the QA engineer. Nevertheless, this is a living document. It's the responsibility of the QA engineer. As the requirements change over time, just like we developers need to refactor or need to go back to implementing certain things based on the changes of requirements, they too, the QA engineers, will find themselves having to go back and rewriting some of their test plans, rewriting some of their automation scripts based on these inevitable changes in the requirements. So yeah, so it's a living document that they are responsible for maintaining. This is an example what a test plan might look like, where we have it's a long list of the scenarios. These are usually lifted off of the use case analysis that might have occurred early on in the design phase, and also the design that occurs in every sprint. Right? Remember that in every sprint, there might be a story that needs to be designed. Right? We need to design the data model. We might need to design the tables. We might need to design also the user interface, where we might have only a wireframe, and we actually need to now make it for real. So based on those early discussions, either earlier in the design phase or during the sprint, during the design phase within the sprint, we might meet with the QA engineer and identify all these scenarios, right? And the developer goes off and actually implements it, whereas the QA engineer goes off and implements this test plan, right? Once you have it ready for me, I'm going to come back and exercise that application, that user interface, and this is going to be what I expect. That if I click on this particular button, right, of adding a new user, my expectation is that a modal will pop up. This is described by the developer. The developer is describing me, this is what should happen. That a modal will pop up, that I will be able to input a username and email, that there will be some create button that I can click on, right? And then it'll be dismissed, and presumably it'll be the new user will appear in some list of users, and then a list of all the different scenarios, again from the use case analysis and discussions with the developer and the rest of the team. Also here we'll keep track on whether this is a purely automated or purely manual test, right? That I've run myself manually by actually visiting the web page, or whether there's a script that can automate this. Also here is the latest result, whether the last time that this was executed, whether this passed or not. Okay, so this would be a really long list of test plans. Also, for each one of these, within the description of the user story, usually the QA engineer will add their 2 cents on what is the acceptance criteria, for us to be able to determine whether the feature is actually complete, right? Whether it actually been implemented correctly. And we did cover some of this a couple of weeks ago. We covered it somewhat in an informal manner, but there's a formal way of capturing acceptance criteria, or AC, and where we format it using keywords such as given, when, then, and. Okay, that we capture basically conditions by which we are satisfying the requirements and signed off by some stakeholder, right? That some stakeholder, either the end user or representing the end user, can accept the application with the current level, quality level, right? Now, the acceptance criteria is a formal set of steps. Right, very similar to what you would capture in a user story, right? Or I'm sorry, in a use case analysis, where you say, these are the steps for accomplishing a particular goal. Very similar, right? This would capture very similar information, and it's very useful for different folks in the team. For developers, an acceptance criteria is very clearly, right, it tells me what I need to implement. Right, that I am not done until I can verify that I can pass that acceptance criteria. That somebody is going to follow those steps, right, and is going to sign off on my implementation, on my code, only if that acceptance criteria passes. So it's very clear for me what I have to implement. I need to pass that acceptance criteria. For the business analyst, it's also very clear whether certain features or certain behaviors are in scope. Right, that they're being addressed by that particular story, right? That has that particular acceptance criteria. So it's very clear whether if a particular feature is implemented or not. And for the QA engineer, it makes it clear exactly what is that they need to test, right? What are the steps for them to verify that when they click here, they should expect this, or that, or the other. Right? So for it clarifies it for the team at large. What is it that we are doing? So just to go and visit each one of these, the different parts of an acceptance criteria has a very specific format, and it uses these keywords, right, or these clauses, right, to capture certain aspects of the acceptance criteria. First, we have the given clause. The given clause is somewhat the precondition, right? What is the initial state of my test? What things can I assume are true, right? That the application is in a particular state, an initial state, from where I can start my test, right? So given that, and some precondition or some initial state of the application, and then you have a couple other clauses. You have the when clause to capture the action that the user performs on the application, or the input that they are providing to the application, right? So whatever they type, or whatever they click on, whatever they mouse they move, right, as they interact with the application, would be captured in the when clause. Then you have the then clause and the and clause. Both of them are used to capture the expected behavior, right? That what is it that we expect the outcome of our test, right? Given that the application is in a particular state, and when I exercise the application in a certain way, then I can expect the outcome to be so and so. Right? So here's a trivial example of a user story that is implementing adding an item to a shopping cart. We would capture things such as, given that I am viewing a particular item, and then when I press the add to cart button on that item, then the item is added to the cart. Right? So again, assuming that you're a particular state, some particular action or input, and then the resulting behavior that you would expect. So this would be a successful, a happy path, perhaps, acceptance criteria, or here's an example of a failed criteria, right? So for instance, which we also want to capture, right? We want to test that this is indeed working correctly, right? That if I try to add to a shopping cart an item that is sold out, that I would expect the application to complain somehow, right? So for instance, I might say that given that I am viewing an item that I know is sold out, if I press the add to cart button, nevertheless, right, I would hope the application would know what to do correctly, right? That the application is not the item is not added to the shopping cart, and that the application would notify me with some alert, right, and some message telling me that complaining to me that that item is out of stock. How dare you, right? So it's the it's a QA's engineer responsibility to maintain these acceptance criteria. Typically these would be captured as part of the story of the user story, right, where all of us can participate. Right, and own that story, us developers, as we develop the application, and the QA engineering as also adding that acceptance criteria to the story. Now, it depends, right? Different organizations do it differently, right? Oftentimes we might have a parent story, and then that parent story might have other sub stories underneath, right? There might be a development story, there might be a design story, there might be a test story, right? And the QA engineer is responsible for the test story, and the developer is responsible for perhaps for the design and the implementation story. Other organizations might have separate stories, not as part of some parent story, but assigned to different folks, where you have the QA story assigned to the QA engineer and the development story assigned to the developer. So again, each team, each organization might do it differently, but nevertheless, they need to be tracked somehow, right? The easiest way is to have it all part of the same story, right? And two folks perhaps updating it. One updates the AC, another one updates the implementation. Oftentimes, it's not quite clear what we mean by something being done. Right? Oftentimes this is a subjective meaning, and that needs to be cleared out at the earliest possible. Right? Oftentimes from a developer's point of view, we might consider done when a feature is working in our development environment, right? And in our machine. Right? I finished my last line of code, it works well, my unit test passed, I'm done. Right? Whereas if you ask a business analyst or QA engineer, they might not consider that to be done, right? They might consider to that, hey, what about all my tests, right? Your unit test worked. What about all my tests? So not until this is deployed to a QA environment, not until the QA engineer has executed all their test plans, their automated tests, their integration tests, not until it passes all that, should we consider this to be done, right? So again, a different perspective of what we might mean by done. Or perhaps the business analyst might consider that no, not until it's in staging or ready to go to production do I consider this to be done, right? So it's a good idea to early on, right? For the team to agree what it is that we mean by done, right? Usually we mean done as having already run the manual tests, that we have run perhaps some manual some automated tests. The QA has done also some integration testing, and there's a sign off by everyone that this indeed this has been tested thoroughly, and it's ready to go into production. Now, oftentimes, because QA might be part of some other organization, there might be some contention between the different organizations. We might see ourselves as rivals, and fail to understand that we're all part of the same. We're all part of the same team, right? Even if we might report to different folks, we're all in it together, right? We are all mature. We all have a vested interest in the quality of the product. So we should resist the temptation at diminishing or taking for granted or even dismissing, the importance of somebody else's contribution to the quality of the application, right? So especially when we have looming deadlines, we tend to, we are tempted to overlook the fact that we still haven't done QA testing, that we're not going to have time, right? That we would like to have as much time as we can all the way up to release, to develop, to test, to run this, and without leaving enough time for smoke tests, for manual tests, for automated tests to have their due time. Okay, so make we know that it's hard for us to be the bearers of bad news, that we are oftentimes adverse at confrontation, but we need to be realistic. We need to be as transparent as possible, and to at the soonest possible time, to inform folks that we are at risk of not being able to deliver certain features. Right, the earlier the better. Right, we certainly don't want to have any surprises at the end. Assuming that everything was fine up until the very last minute, and realizing that we're not going to be able to deliver. And we need to resist the temptation to rush, to skip, to cut corners, right? That is only going to bite us later on, right? We're going to introduce a technical debt that at some point we're going to have to pay interest into that debt, right? So it's better to just have cool heads prevail, and just come clean and not rush this, right? And just point out as much as possible.